We begin in Turkey and northern Syria, where in the early hours of the morning, a series of powerful earthquakes have caused widespread damage and killed almost 1,500 people. Many thousands more have been injured and an unknown number of people are still missing. The biggest tremor had a magnitude of 7.8 with an epicentre in Turkey's Gaziantep province, which borders northern Syria. It came just after 4 in the morning local time. But there have been almost 30 other shocks in the region, all powerful enough to magnify the damage. The earthquake was felt 700 kilometres away in Gaza and in Egypt. Well, Turkey has declared a state of emergency. The Syrian government is also taking emergency measures, but the response in that country is being made far more complex by the effects of civil war. Now, while Turkey's allies, including the United States, the European Union and NATO, have offered help, there have been far fewer offers for Syria. In fact, many Western countries have shunned its governments for its actions during the civil war, but they also consider many of the opposition rebel groups to be terrorist organisations. Well, the casualty figures are simply horrific. Turkey's President Erdogan says at least 912 people have died in his country, with nearly 5,400 people injured. Well, Syrian government figures say at least 326 people have been killed. And the White Helmets Rescue Group, which operates in opposition-held parts of Syria, says more than 221 people are known to have died in those areas, with thousands missing and thousands of buildings having collapsed. Those figures, though, are certain to rise. Well, let's cross live now to Lina Sinjar, who's our correspondent in Beirut. And Lina, before we go on to talk about what happened, I believe you felt the earthquake, didn't you?
Certainly, it was really the early hours of the morning here in Beirut. With a difference of timing, it was like around 3 a.m., 3:15 a.m. in the morning, where I felt the whole building was shaking, and items moving, chandeliers moving in the ceiling, and then some stuff like falling on the ground. It was certainly the quickest, the hardest earthquake that we've ever felt in this region. Was a reminder of the explosion in the port of Beirut, in 2020, but far more, in the scale of it, basically. But luckily, in Lebanon, there are no casualties or any damages reported in comparison to what we are seeing and, watching happening both in Turkey and in Syria.
Absolutely, Lina. And let's talk about what happened in Turkey, because the devastation there is horrendous.
It is. And, as we talked, just like, in the past hour or so, there were reports of another earthquake hitting central Turkey. So we're still waiting to hear, if it caused any damage. But the aftermath of the early morning one is massive. It hit the province of Gaziantep. Hitting at least 10 cities there on the stretch of the borderline with Syria. Turkey is a country that is prone to earthquake. It's learned how to deal with it by living it over years and years, and develop its infrastructure, its response mechanism, its health system. Yet the scale today is like sending made the country call for international support to arrive, and many countries have already announced its readiness to come to Turkey for rescue operation. We've heard an earlier government official saying that Azerbaijan is already sending 400 of its rescue team, experts in rescue operation. Other countries will follow suit, and we will know about them as they're announced throughout the hours of the day. But the images coming from Turkey are, shocking. People had to run, sometimes barefoot in the early hours of the morning at a time of a winter storm that is hitting the whole region. They had to come out in the cold, sitting in their cars, or even standing in the open air to seek shelter.
And let's talk about Syria. Of course, parts of Syria have also been hit. The situation there is a bit more complex in terms of getting information out and indeed help in.
Well, definitely there are information coming out, but scattered between the government and opposition-held area. There are incredible, rescue teams and volunteers who are in, the opposition area who are reporting the situation, but calling it a natural disaster. It's beyond their capacity to help. Don't forget that in northern Syria, right by the border of Turkey, this is an area that was facing heavy bombardment by both government and Russia over the past decade, destroying its infrastructure, destroying its hospitals. And what is left is barely minimum to help the thousands who are in need at the moment. They're calling for aid, they're calling for international communities to support them. But it's hard to tell at this moment if any of the aid coming to Turkey will manage to cross the border and help those in need in Syria, mainly in refugee camps and, poorly, infrastructured area.
Lina, thank you very much. Lina Sinjab there in Beirut for us. Well, since the first large earthquake with magnitude of 7.8 at just after 4 a.m. local, that's 1 a.m. GMT, there have been around 30 aftershocks. The largest has come within the last hour. We've been hearing that a new 7.5 tremor near Ekinozu in Turkey has been felt. That's around 120 kilometres north of the epicenter of the first earthquake in Gaziantep. So an earthquake of around 7.5 in magnitude has struck southeastern Turkey, according to the country's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, the AFAD. We are now awaiting, however, reports of any new damage caused by that. Well, let's cross live now to Istanbul and speak to the BBC's Emre Tamil, who is there for us. And Emre, give us an understanding of what has been happening in that area where the first earthquake hit this morning.
First of all, a second massive earthquake in Turkey less than an hour ago. As you said, its center was in southern province of Kahramanmaraş again. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority announced its magnitude as 7.6 and emphasized that it's a new earthquake, not an aftershock. Details are still coming in. The first quake was centered in Pazarcık district of Kahramanmaraş province and struck at 4:17 a.m. local time. The magnitude of this first quake was announced at 7.4 at first, then revised at 7.7, and as Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan emphasized that it is the second biggest earthquake in Turkey's history. President Erdogan said the death toll rose to 912 in 10 provinces. He also added that 5,385 people were wounded, 2,470 people were saved from the rubble as a result of the rescue efforts. However, as he said, I quote him, "I can't predict how much the death toll will rise as search and rescue efforts continue," he said, and the number of buildings which has been destroyed is close to 3,000. A level 4 alarm has been declared, which means Turkey is calling for international assistance. And President Erdogan announced that 45 countries had so far offered assistance, and authorities scrambled rescue teams and supply aircraft to the affected area. State of emergency was declared in all affected provinces, and authorities urged people not to use mobile phones to allow rescuers to coordinate the efforts. The chief of the Turkish Red Crescent Relief Agency issued a statement saying that they urgently need blood donations and appealed people to do that. And Turkish armed forces have set up an air corridor to ensure that search and rescue teams will be able to reach to all zones affected by the earthquakes.
Emre, we heard earlier on from President Erdogan talking about this being the biggest earthquake disaster the country has seen for nearly 100 years.
Yes, Turkey is among the most earthquake-prone countries in the world, and this is the second biggest earthquake in Turkey's history. The biggest one was in eastern province of Erzincan in 1939 with a magnitude of 7.9, and this quake claimed more than 30,000 lives. Most of the people obviously remembered the big quake which happened in 1999, which was a severe quake, devastated Izmit and heavily populated eastern Marmara Sea region. near Istanbul, country's biggest city. This quake killed more than 17,000 people. And obviously, as President Erdogan said earlier, authorities is really fearful that that toll can rise.
And of course, we were mentioning earlier on, and you mentioned earlier on, as the earthquake hit, the weather had at that point turned extremely cold, which of course is making the rescue operation and conditions for those who have survived very difficult indeed.
Yes, it's really difficult because earthquake hit at a very early time, 4:17 local time, and obviously we're in the middle of a winter, freezing conditions in these regions. We are talking about eastern Turkey and southeastern Turkey. Winter conditions are really sharp, and which makes rescue efforts difficult than ever.
Okay, Emre Tamil from BBC in Istanbul. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Well, the tremor may have happened before dawn, but the dangers caused by the damage to buildings remain very active. Just take a look at this. It's an apartment block in Halilay, just 100 kilometres from the epicentre. As you can see, traffic and pedestrians are so close, it's seemingly not even aware that it's about to collapse. It happens just slowly enough, thank goodness, that everyone in the immediate area seems to be able to get to safety. You can also see how the building seems to collapse almost vertically, pushing out the huge cloud of dust and rubble. It's not thought that anyone was inside that building at the time.